From studios at the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, this is Fourth and State. In this edition, two state senators, one a Republican, one a Democrat, say they have an answer for promoting bipartisanship in Madison. I'm David Haynes. I'm the opinions editor at the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. Welcome to Fourth and State. I'm joined today by two state senators, Senator Tim Cullen, a Democrat from Janesville, and Senator Dale Schultz, a Republican from Richland Center. And they are about to introduce legislation in the state legislature that would change the way that Wisconsin draws its political maps, reapportionment. Gentlemen, welcome.
Nice to be here.
Thanks for being here. Why don't you explain, maybe start with you, Senator Cullen, why you think it's necessary to make a change?
Well, it's necessary because reapportionment today done by the legislature is the most partisan, most political activity. There's zero public policy involved in it, and it's legislators trying to draw maps to keep their own jobs. And it's totally contrary to the public interest, which I think is to have some kind of competitive elections, as many as possible, where the results of the election are not known, and then people from both parties can get involved and pick someone. And we're suggesting that we basically copy what Iowa does. They've done it for 30 years. Impartial group a partisan group of people picked two Democrats, two Republicans, pick a fifth person who they have to agree on, who is therefore not going to be Democrat or Republican. And they oversee the drawing of the map by the legislative agency. And the legislature has to vote on it. If the legislature keeps turning it down, it goes to the Supreme Court. But as much as possible, it acknowledges the existence of politics, but as much as possible, it keeps politics out.
So the Legislative Reference Bureau would actually do the maps. And Senator Schultz, let me turn to you. What's the result of doing the maps the way we do them now, where the state legislature actually draws them?
Well, it's crystal clear. What we wind up with is an intensity of partisanship in our state, and there are a lot of people who are sort of recoiling from that.
And what do you think that happens? What is it that?
Well, I think what happens is that the natural tendency for people in office is to sort of, safeguard their own seat, and when the goal becomes how do I make myself safe, you tend to make both sides partisans to a greater extent, because there's taking votes from the other political party and packing them in a district while you're trying to pack your own partisan votes in your own. The net result is what office holders become responsive to is the most extreme elements in their own party. And we see that reflected in the process on a daily basis as people are very far apart from one another, and as the public becomes increasingly anxious about changes in the government and the policies making radical shifts as a result.
And doesn't the real election sort of shift from the general election to the primary because you have non-competitive districts?
Absolutely, and what you see is at election time, foregone conclusions for that final election. There's really maybe one or two contested elections, in the November election cycle, and people go, well, hey, the election was over in the primary. And folks who are, independents have to choose which political party they're going to be a part of, and they kind of feel like, the game is pretty much rigged, and their vote doesn't count for much.
And Senator Cullen, how has this worked in Iowa? I think Iowa's had it since
1980.
1980.
Well, it works very well, and it's sort of a non-issue in Iowa. It's in place. It's worked for a long time, and legislators know. I think they'd be asking for a lot of trouble to try to change it. The public likes it. I always think that one of the best ways to look at a reapportionment map is to look for right angles. See if counties are intact. And if there's a lot of right angles, it's probably not a political map. A partisan gerrymandered map doesn't have a lot of right angles. It's got all kinds of zigzags.
Opponents have argued, and probably will argue, that this was an unusual case this time because the Republicans controlled both houses of the legislature and the governorship. That doesn't happen that often. And in fact, in the past, the courts have drawn our maps anyway, and that's a fairly neutral body doing it. So why do we need this change?
Well, I think the courts, while appearing neutral, when the courts draw the maps are drawn by the clerks of the judges. In this case, it's always been a federal judge in Wisconsin. And so you're having maps drawn by the federal judge clerks who have their political views quite frequently. That's often based on what president appointed the federal judge, and then that reflects who their clerks are. So you get more partisanship than you might think in a federally judicially drawn map. We don't think there's any partisan politics in the Legislative Reference Bureau.
You've said that you would like to remove politics from it as much as you can, but you can't take it out entirely.
Well, absolutely, and that's why we acknowledge a role for the majority and minority leaders in each house to appoint someone to a commission, and yet at the same time we think if we're going to have some balance, we'll let them select that fifth person who will also become the chair. My district borders Iowa, and people look at us and they go, why do you waste all that money going through something that we do very quickly here that everybody's happy about, and yet in your state there's so much angst, and you know, all you have to do is do what we do, and you can actually be about the business of working on the legislation that people want you to work on rather than worrying about politics. And I think that's what makes this a common sense reform.
Talk for a minute about what the committee of 5 would do. There would be one person appointed by the leaders of both parties in both houses, so 4 people, plus a fifth then who would become the chairman that the 4 would choose. What would that committee do? The LRB is going to actually draw the maps, but what would the committee do to set up the role of the LRB?
Well, they would oversee the LRB. They would give them some direction and the legislation gives them some direction. And then once there's a map drawn, this 5-member committee would actually take that map around the state and hold public hearings.
Okay.
Let the citizens have some input into it. So they're the overseer of the process.
And your legislation also calls for, I believe, 3 chances for the LRB. It would go to the legislature for approval. The governor would also have a veto right. After the 3rd attempt, if it ever came to that, then it would go to the state Supreme Court?
Yes.
That's correct, and that's never happened in Iowa.
Okay.
So the hope is that that group would sit down and say, all right, what are the criteria that ought to go into a reapportionment map? Well, I think the first thing they'd say is what the public says. They shouldn't be drawn, to take care of legislators' homes. They should be about compactness. They should be about following the Voting Rights Act and the federal law. And once the major criteria are decided upon, most of this is just cranked into a computer. And then the group can look at it with a partisan eye, and they say, yeah, that's fair. We can compete in this arena, and it's then taken out, shared with the public. If the public comes back generally favorable, that's the map. And there isn't hiring outside lawyers. It's done in a completely transparent manner, and it goes relatively quickly, and it isn't a major distraction in the legislature.
Well, Senator Schultz, Senator Cullen, thanks for being with us on 4th and State. We'll look forward to your legislation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.